Welcome, everybody, to the June 27th episode of Security Data Operations. I almost did it. I knew I was going to mess up the titles one of these days. Security Data Operations, June 27th episode. This is our bi-monthly stream where we talk about all things security operations, data operations, and the convergence of the two in the modern day cybersecurity team. John is out on vacation today, but fear not, I got a new sidekick for the day. Maybe you saw it on LinkedIn. You might not have seen it on LinkedIn. I will introduce him here in a bit, but just a really quick reminder on the rules. Rule number 1, above any and all things, no toxicity. What does that mean? No racist, sexist, misogynistic, elitist, or otherwise toxic behavior in chat. We do have mods that will make no qualms out of utilizing that ban button. However, mods are not here to stifle chat in any way, which leads us to the second rule, or actually kind of more of a reminder. We welcome questions. We absolutely do love questions. One of the benefits of our streams being live is the ability to ask questions in real time of myself, my guest, all the time. We do encourage questions throughout the entirety of the stream. What does that mean? Is that you can ask your questions anytime. If you've been part of a stream before, if this is your first time here, you know that we welcome questions all of the time. Drop them into chat. Some mod will grab them, put them into a queue, and then push them up onto screen. We do this. We encourage the questions throughout the entire stream. Instead of waiting for a dedicated Q&A at the end, this is a way that we can all have an interactive conversation as we talk about something that hopefully will be particularly interesting to you. Chat, let's put our hands together across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and X for my good friend, Jeremy Fisher. Jeremy, welcome to the SecDataOps stream. How the hell are you, sir?
Hey, Neal. I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks for having me on.
Now you're one of those, like, you probably won't say it, but you're a long-time listener, first time guest on the stream.
First time caller.
What does what is it like to kind of see it from this side for the first time?
It's pretty cool, you know, like, I've messed around with, OBS a little bit myself and some other things, but I'm not, I don't really do social any more than I absolutely have to. So, it's different. Looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good time. Awesome. Now, you've had a pretty awesome career. I remember, gosh, it's been 2 years now, I think, that we've been working together, close to it. You've had a pretty awesome career, and I was really impressed when you came to the team. You've got a lot of software engineering background. You've also done some data science with DST systems. Super notable, probably for a lot of the people in chat, is that you were also CTO for Archer Risk Management. So for all those GRC folks in chat who have used Archer, you can hit !guest in chat and bring all your grievances for how Archer works. No.
To Jeremy.
I'm 2 years past. It's not my thing anymore.
That was, I have to say that was my worst software implementation experience. I was fresh out of the military. This was 2013 when it came out. We had just bought Archer. This was when it was still on-prem before they moved it to the cloud. And trying to implement Archer on-prem for vendor risk management, vulnerability risk management, and just like a risk framework, I remember cussing that platform to no end.
Yeah. I was there for 4 years. We made it a lot better in that time.
Yeah.
And in fairness, it is a pretty strong platform. I'm still very positive on Archer, the platform for the market that it serves. Still very positive on the organization. Got a lot of friends there. But yeah, there are, if you're not a very large enterprise with very complicated GRC needs, if you're not a GRC person and you're coming into it for the first time, it's going to feel like a lot. It is a big platform. I get that.
It's very powerful. I think so with that being said, with kind of your experience at Archer and kind of like having built a large application like that, and plus your kind of roots in data science, and you and I were talking kind of as we were prepping into this, and you talked about some of your experience being a data nerd, if you will. If you had to sum up how you've seen the intersection of cybersecurity and data science, or just data in general, over the years. How would you describe it?
Well, my career, security's been a relatively recent thing for me, the last like 6 or 7 years of my career. But for the first half or more, I worked in advertising and media, always in technology, building software, building product. But that's a very different space. And one of the cool things about being in media and advertising through the 2000s was I got to work with all of the NoSQL stuff before it was cool. Also, before it was very mature. So
the two are mutually exclusive of each other, by the way.
Yeah. Yes, that is. So all of your, like Mongo, Redis, Cassandra, definitely lots with Hadoop, all the big data tech we were using because we had a lot of data, and what we call data science today. To me, like I have a computer science background, and I've got to work alongside and been fortunate to have a lot of like PhDs in math and astrophysics and like really hard sciences. Working with me in that field, and they know a heck of a lot more. Like they've forgotten more about statistics than I ever learned. But I did come to it from a very applied angle. And one of the cool things about that industry was, if you can come up with an algorithm that's just 1% better than control, we've got like billions of events running through the system every day. It's really easy to test. It's really easy to see what performs better, and very small gains lead to a lot of money when you're working off of like a $10 or $12 million a month base. And so I did have the opportunity to build some real data and data science chops, before it was cool. So
what was something about that industry, about that data science industry, as you spent time with these high performing, super smart individuals? What was kind of something about that shocked you as you were kind of like diving into it?
The power of it, first off, is really impressive. And since that time, like there's been a lot of hype. And so, I think we've probably been down to the bottom of the trough of disappointment, and we're up on the peak of. I haven't been responsible for Gartner relationships for 2 years, so I forget what it's called. But like we're through the worst of that. I think we're over our disappointment. But in those days, it was just kind of greenfield, and basically a new frontier, and we were bringing these things to bear on problems and seeing results, and there weren't a lot of people talking about it. So just to be able to push an algorithm out and say, oh, hey, that is a lot better than the control, or even, again, just a little bit better, that's good enough. And that rapid feedback, that was really, really exciting. And seeing what the predictive analytics could do for the business, but also through that, I got a lot of experience building analytics data systems to empower the people who are like handling client relationships and pulling the levers and, managing advertiser and publisher spend, and, just the power of bringing people data. Every time I've led some kind of like just fundamental BI data cubing type, data warehousing project, every time I've got to bring it to a group for the first time, they've always been like, oh my gosh, how did I ever do my job before this? And there's visibility, and seeing what that does to make people's lives better and easier.
Nice. Before we get into the big topic, Cybertooth does have a ridiculously important question for you. What is your cat's name?
Very on topic, very important. This cat's name is Willow, and you might see another one by the name of Baxter, both named by my daughter, who's currently 10, but was 8 and I don't know, maybe 4 for the cat naming. So
we get all myriad of questions from the cyber and security community. So it's a reminder, everybody, drop your questions in the chat, especially as we go through and talk about this. Speaking of talking about it, I do want to dive into our topic for everyone today. We are all gathered here today to talk about OCSF, or the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. Now, Jeremy, I've done several Splunk implementations, on-prem, hybrid, in the cloud. I've built a lot of detections and dashboarding, threat hunting capabilities and things like that over my years, as well as spent a lot of time in Elastic. And so I'm used to thinking about SIMs and data architectures in the sense of the common information model, or the SIM. Real quick, for everybody else who's spent some time in that similar type of background and maybe new to OCSF, let's start really, really high level. And can you start by just describing for folks maybe the top 3 differences between OCSF and the common information model?
Yeah. Most importantly, OCSF, while it has a lot of backing from Splunk, it's not just Splunk. A lot of big players are behind OCSF. So Splunk and AWS were kind of the 2 main founding members, but it has since grown to include at least some level of contribution from just about every large name you can think of in cybersecurity. And so we've seen lots of different schema come around for security. This is the first one that, to me, really feels open and not specific to a vendor. Like, a lot of people like SIM, a lot of people, ECS is now open source. So that's good, but OCSF has a real open community. I do a lot with the community now, and I talk to people from all over the industry through that. So that's probably the first and maybe most important.
Go ahead, keep going.
So, all right, you asked for top 3. That's one.
Yeah, one.
Number 2, one thing that I think a lot of people miss the first time looking at it is that OCSF is hierarchical. And so you have the ability it has complex types. So you've got events, which have attributes, but those attributes can be objects, which have attributes of their own, and even in a few cases relate back to events. And you can model lists. And while lists are always painful to work with, when you really need to model a list, it's more painful to not be able to model it. And so those were that was a feature that was of a lot of interest to me when we went with OCSF at Query. We kind of conceive of security data as a graph, relationships between everything, needed the ability to reuse, what are objects in OCSF across different platforms. And so that was, really liked that. And then maybe a third way that it's different from SIM, at least to me, OCSF is highly extensible. So it really is a schema framework. So there is a core schema, and we use that. But if what you're doing isn't well represented there, it's really easy to extend the schema for your own needs. And there are considerations like maybe you might sacrifice interop, or one thing that we've done at Query, like we have a lot of things we've done a lot of modeling in our own private extension, and then we kind of give that back. And when we give it back, it usually goes through some refinement with the community, and it ends up in a better place because it's had more smart people looking at it. But sometimes then we got to go change our version of it. So things to think about. But that was another thing that I really liked about OCSF.
So as I listen to you talk, I hear you talk about, the hierarchical model of OCSF. And I think for me, as I start to learn a ton from you and the team around OCSF, that's what I really start to notice on it. And when you say hierarchical, to me, it sounds like depth, right? Sounds like you can get, you can map that security on a much, much deeper level than you were able to do with the common information model. Is that a fair assessment to kind of look at it that way?
Yeah. OCSF can go deeper, and I would say more broad as well. Or at least the core schema is very broad. That's maybe one of our challenges with it, is it can be a lot to take in when you first start with it. But yes, you can go very deep and show relationships that you could not have shown in a flat schema.
So this one came through, and I thought this one was pretty interesting as well, especially since it's pretty relevant to kind of, something I want to talk about here a little bit later. But, Cybertooth again wants to know, what are your thoughts on OCSF being adopted by AWS competitors and their platforms, or is normalization work always required? He gives references to Azure Sentinel with KQL and Google Chronicle with Yara.
Yeah, that's That's a good question. So, like AWS was the first big vendor to go OCSF native with security legs. Splunk has a lot of tooling, so you can, you've got interop between your main SIM data in OCSF and Splunk, but AWS started with it in SecLake. But we have already seen some benefits to using OCSF along the lines of interop. Like when we built our SecLake integration, they were OCSF, we were OCSF. We weren't the same flavor of OCSF, but we were able to build an automated adapter that would, bridge that gap. So that was pretty cool. And some of the core tooling around that, we actually gave back to the community and open sourced. But that was much more straightforward than going from, OCSF to Yara or really any other format would have been. And then in addition to that, really all of the large vendors are working on some type of OCSF interop to some extent. Like I know Microsoft has a lot that they plan to announce around what they're doing with OCSF. And of course, Splunk has a high degree of support for it. As we see that come about more broadly, I think it will become, I hope it will become more of a lingua franca for security.
Now you keep throwing out all these names like Amazon and Splunk and Microsoft working together. Now, I think what is important to highlight for folks is that like there's an entire community right around OCSF. There's a Slack channel, and you guys meet regularly as an OCSF leadership team. There's an entire ecosystem, if you will, that kind of comes with participating in this open source type of project. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to work with your peers or your other leaders in Amazon and Splunk and the broader OCSF community and kind of what that's like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started with OCSF very, very early. So it was announced at Black Hat 2 years ago, and we picked it up just like not 2 months after it was first made public. So we were still in a very early version, not yet generally available, stable release. And for probably our first 9 months, give or take, in that journey, we didn't get very involved in the community. And we did that. And I know I've talked to other people who have expressed the same concern when they're starting out. So we did not engage with the community at first because as much as, our whole team loves open source and wants to give back, we were concerned that in trying to push changes upstream, things would slow down a lot. There are a lot of people involved. And so, I didn't want to wait weeks and weeks to get things approved when we were trying to go as fast as we possibly could in the early days. And so we waited. And when we finally did get engaged, I said, we shouldn't have done this because the community has been really responsive. It's like at least the key people, the people who are really moving it forward are all really sharp. Again, like from many different organizations. So I get a nice cross section of the industry. We tend to be, there are a lot of like distinguished engineer types. There are some CTO types like me, lots of data engineers and security engineering types who are there. And everybody's pretty open to good ideas. And if you're worried that yours is a bad idea, they're still open to that too, and generally pretty kind on how
everybody's usually
feedback's
open
provided.
To bad ideas. That there's no real issue.
Well, we're at least kind about receiving bad ideas. So more than I could say for some open source communities.
When you talk about that getting involved, do I sense just a tad bit of regret that you didn't get involved sooner? Is that what I'm hearing in your voice?
Yeah.
What was the biggest? What was it? Was it just something? Was it a self-imposed fear that you kind of put upon yourself, or for not getting involved earlier?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was one that I shared with a few others at Query, but it wasn't justified. at least not. I could say, well, justified from past experiences with, like I've worked on a couple of not open, but industry data models in the past, and there were committees and long approval processes, and but that has not been the case with OCSF. It's all on GitHub, and Slack. Generally works a lot like any other modern development project where people are fairly responsive to feedback. It's you're not waiting weeks until the next change advisory board meeting or anything like that. It's pretty fast, pretty responsive. So yeah, definitely I feel some regret when we did get engaged. One of the first things that we got engaged on was as the schema was new, the framework was new, there wasn't a lot of tooling around it, and people would make changes that were like kind of sort of permissible, but not really, wouldn't have the effect that the data modeler intended, and they would break some of our tools. And so, after the third or fourth time, I or somebody else on the team had to fix that. And I was like, man, this really needs a validator, or basically a linter of sorts. And so I just wrote one, and so, I was like, hey, community, like, what do you think about this? And they're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's wire that in. And so if I had done that 6 months sooner, it would have been much, I could have avoided a lot of wasted energy.
So
same's true for when we've we've contributed our data model.
I think this is important for folks in chat to hear. I talk to a lot of practitioners, right, who are scared to get involved, and they're like, how do I get involved? Like, what if they don't like my ideas? What if I get rejected? What if I get turned down? Right? Stuff like this. And I think what you're describing is like, there's everybody has it, even at your level where you've been doing this for years. You've been in software development for a while. You're very high profile in this sense, and you feel very confident in terms of adopting OCSF, still really new. And you even have a little bit of like, should I get involved? Should I not get involved? But then there's ultimately that fear and that regret that you didn't earlier. Is that kind of a good way for people to kind of take away, like, hey, you should get off your ass and get involved in something?
Yeah. Again, it's a pretty friendly community. Some communities are not so friendly, but in this one, I think the biggest barrier to entry is just get into the OCSF Slack. And I think that still requires that you send somebody an email. It's on the OCSF GitHub, and there'll be a website pretty soon. But once you're in, it can be a little intimidating to post in the Pound General, because there are a lot of people and from many different companies in there. If you're nervous about that, just maybe watch some of the people who are posting a lot, DM them if you really need to, or find one of the other channels off to the side. Like there's a mappings channel where that's a good one for people to jump into, because there's a lot of discussion there about how would you map data from such and such to this model. It may be an easier one to start out with. And if that feels too extroverted for you, you can always just kind of start lurking on GitHub and file issues, start commenting on pull requests or whatever.
So kind of back over to the community. I want to kind of bring it back to you collaborating with a lot of your DEs and other folks across the data space and the SIM space and the architecture space. Have you guys had any like aha moments as you've ventured into kind of this OCSF and this redefining the security data model, if you will? Has there been any like wow, this could really change how we think about security or security data?
I think the big aha moment was probably in the original vision. Like, boy, if we were all speaking the same freaking language, a lot of this would be much easier. And that's part of what we're trying to do at Query with more than just the data model. But I think that's really where OCSF has the promise to have a really positive impact on people's lives in security, and to help us catch the bad guys. If anything since then, some of the different directions, like we've seen like the findings category has a lot of stuff that you might not typically go to a SIM to look for. And for a long time, there wasn't really threat intelligence in OCSF, but that's coming out in 1.3. That was actually John Rao had a lot to do with that. So it keeps getting broader, and it was already pretty deep. So, the more tools that we can bring into that ecosystem, the more vendors who participate, it just gets stronger.
So let me piggyback on that one for here a little bit, because you did talk about security finding, or just findings in general, and then the threat intelligence model getting bigger. And yeah, definitely kudos for John for leading a lot of that. But I think our community is pretty broad, with a lot of practitioners, a lot of leaders, and sometimes, let's just face it, like, security people are lazy. Like, call it what it is. Security people are just generally lazy, right? And there may be some that look at OCSF and look at that depth of the data model that we talk about, and really, fundamentally, kind of, if you want to call it, the lack of support in some of the current tooling, and feel just a little disincentivized to look at OCSF. So if you were to speak directly to those folks and talk about why you think teams need to move into a direction, like, what is it that's in it for them by starting to look at and become informed and empowered upon OCSF?
Yeah, maybe two things. The first is systems interoperability, and we're definitely not fully delivering on that promise yet, because vendor support, it takes a long time to get adoption for these things across an industry, especially this industry. But I feel like we already have a ton of traction for all the older OCSF is. So systems interoperability, that's good. But then another thing for analysts to think of, and I know you have a lot of analysts aspiring to grow their careers who tune into this, Neal, just by learning a little bit of OCSF. I think I believe it's going to be here for a while, even if it never becomes like the one data model to rule them all. I think it's going to be around. And so learning it doesn't hurt you. And because of its breadth, learning a little bit of the data model then enables you to learn more of the data model, and to, in so doing, broaden your horizons about what's going on in security. And, maybe you don't know a lot about risk management or whatever it is, but as you start to see some of the findings around that, you learn a little bit more, and it makes you a better security operator.
Do you see a world where OCSF expands out of, like, I think when we talk about the common information model, we talk about the adoption, it becomes really easy in the current implementation of some of the current SIM data models to just smash data into an index and, instantly be able to, find the data, search the columns, do whatever it is you need to do without any level of complicated mapping. Do you see that challenge becoming any easier, or do you think that now needs to become a necessary evil, given maybe some of the complications of the security ecosystem that we've created?
Yeah. First off, if everything's using the same or a similar schema, yeah, that definitely makes things easier, but it could be a long time before that's the case. Just being really, really truthful here.
Yeah.
When I hear people, I've heard a number of new adopters to AWS Security Lake complain about OCSF. And then when I dig into it, the complaint is really, I used to use Splunk or some other index-based technology, so I could just land everything and map it later, or never map it at search time. And like Splunk is great for that. Those are elastic or whatever, right? That's how they work. Whereas something like Security Lake, is really great for, like a scanning operation. So if you want to run statistics, a database like SecLake, or, what it's, Athena, Trino that it's built on, will outperform the reverse index for that sort of operation many, many, many times over. And also you can, your write speed is a lot higher. And so really that upfront mapping is usually has less to do with OCSF and more to do with data architecture choices. And there's really, if you want, you could use both, have a reverse index for on your logs, and also, and that's, we talk about like your, gold and silver and bronze records. And that's kind of typical in large data projects to have different levels. I was gonna say,
if you're going to throw those acronyms out there, you should probably kind of like dive just a little deep and kind of explain what those acronyms are for the non-data nerds of the chat.
Yeah. Like golden record tends, we talk about that like it's the platonic form of the information you're modeling. Like in marketing automation, the golden record in your CRM or anything is like, that is the best information that we possibly have on Neal, so that we can, better deliver the spam to Neal or whatever it is. Silver is
golf
like
ads.
We haven't cleaned it as
relevant. Make it golf.
Yeah,
ads, right?
Yeah. In the golden record, we'll know to include some golf ads. Silver record is like your data is a little dirtier. It's probably been processed, but maybe we haven't built out as many relationships. We haven't deduplicated, but that can be good. It might be advantageous because maybe the golden record is heresy to say this, but sometimes it's wrong. So you have to go back down to
sometimes the golden record isn't as golden as you thought it was.
Yeah. Having built a couple of golden record type systems, I can attest. And then, bronze is usually like just your staging area. And so you might, very common to, you land data, maybe you land it in like these days an S3 bucket, or, it's basically just files. Those are log files. And then, silver is like, we're starting to bring that together. Maybe now it's indexed, but it's, golden record might be like usually that's your smallest data set. Obviously, you've discarded a lot of information, and your choice of underlying data technology should really have more to do with how you plan to use data there. We see a lot of security data decisions being made around cost, which matters, or this is the shiny new thing. Maybe it doesn't matter, but at least it's an understandable human motivation. But one thing that all of that no SQL experience taught me in the late aughts, early 2010s, was that you really have to use the tool that best fits. And, like the classic relational database is still really good at what it does. Like in one of the things people take for granted when they move away from a typical, like a Postgres or SQL Server or something, is that, the relational algebra or proofs around that, it is just mathematically verifiable, a great way to get random access to data, right? But when your access patterns more, maybe a flat table makes more sense, maybe a column store makes more sense, maybe a document-oriented database can provide better support, maybe it's that Lucene style reverse index that you see in Splunk and Elastic, whatever it is, you want to optimize the tooling and the way you store your data for the way you're going to access it. And that was maybe the main lesson of the big data hype of the early 2010s.
Whoa, that was a lot of data. That was a lot of data engineering. And you got all this from OJT, basically, right? You didn't, there wasn't a lot of this that you...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No schooling for this whatsoever.
That's... in software engineering, you graduate with your bachelor's degree and you now have negative 2 years of experience.
Hey, for all you in the community who hear me rag on degrees, I'm not the only one that rags on degrees. You hear this?
No, certainly no degree elitism. I mean, I've worked with plenty of PhDs and they were all very impressive, but I have also worked with people who never went to college at all and were equally impressive. Some very keen minds. That's one of the great things about this industry.
Yeah. So I want to bring it back kind of over to, I want to bring it back to query, but not necessarily from a query perspective, but more back in terms of you've got some competing priorities. Let's face it, right? I think you hit on a little bit of these, right? Where, as CTO for a company that's trying to implement OCSF, you're having to meet customer needs, but you're also having to give back to the community. How have you kind of like professionally kind of managed that responsibility? Because you obviously have a huge passion for being involved with OCSF. You've spoken at the OCSF breakfast at Reinforce, or excuse me, at RSA. You're very well known amongst the Slack community that exists for OCSF. And so, kind of, how do you talk about that balance professionally between meeting your customer needs as CTO for a company, but also giving back to the community and what's involved in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do I balance it? Probably poorly. I kind of look at so right now, as far as Query goes, most of the OCSF contributions are coming from me and from John Rao. And so those are pretty heavy hitters at Query, but it's also not like it's not our full-time job. I joke that my OCSF contributions are kind of like my Google 10% project. And if you've worked at Google, or people who've worked at Google, that was, at least historically, like, yeah, you can spend 10% of your time on your passion project, but it's kind of like you give 100% to your normal job first, and then you can spend another 10% of your time on your passion project.
So it's not really 10% because you're spending 100% somewhere else.
Yeah, there's some of that, and I think John might feel the same way. But we have. That's not to say that, like, I don't spend some of my Query workday doing OCSF stuff. And I have felt like that time so far has been really well spent. There's a bit of, rising tide lifts all boats. The more that we can do around OCSF, because we're pretty committed to it, or at least to the schema framework, that I really like. And like we've built a lot of tooling internally around it, and we're not going to change that anytime soon. So the more we can make that community better, that it does help us too. And we've gotten, Query kind of punches above its weight in terms of our contributions there.
What do you mean by that?
We get some visibility.
I've heard you say that before, but what exactly does that mean from an industry perspective?
Yeah. We're a company, we're a little company. Less than 30 people today, and 30 really smart, really experienced people. This is a great team, but we're giving a lot back to the community. And in terms of what we're contributing, I'm going to kind of pat myself on the back a little bit, and it's right up there with contributions from much, much, much bigger, companies of tens of thousands of people.
So I want to pivot again one more time on you. This one's not going to be OCSF related. This is now a great opportunity for folks who have OCSF questions to drop them in the chat. I do see one over on LinkedIn that I'll get to here in a little bit, and I see a couple over on Twitch as well. I noticed that as I was looking at your profile ahead of this stream, I saw something interesting. You put in your header for your LinkedIn bio that you are a SaaS and an AI leader. Now, I know from our conversations together that typically when AI enters the chat, your eyes have a tendency to roll in the back of your head a little bit. So I thought that was an interesting choice to advertise yourself out there as an AI leader when I know that you're incredibly cynical on AI. And so what are your thoughts, especially as a developer, especially as a data nerd, about AI?
Yeah, good. That makes me think. I haven't updated my LinkedIn header since I came to Query, so I probably ought to. That dates back to a pre-LLM time, but still, it's still relevant. So that's there because I have legitimately done a lot of work around what pre-LLM AI, a little bit of LLM and deep learning and neural networks, but other flavors as well. And lots of what we might say data science, more now we might call them more classic machine learning algorithms, right? Which is why that's in the title. But as far as AI, it's inescapable in any technical career, and I get cynical when people start talking about it, and that can be kind of, my cynicism is tied to the hype cycle, I guess, and so as that comes down, I'll feel better about it. I've having employed a lot of different machine learning and genetic algorithms and other types of predictive analytics. When well used, they are very powerful, sometimes transformative. There are a lot of problems that computers can solve that humans couldn't solve. And we need to use that. And, I'm an advocate for software people using tools like GitHub Copilot. I encourage the team to use that. I think everybody's using it now. And I use it, and I'm always pretty impressed with how well it works. Its suggestions save me a lot of time. It's also, though, not lost on me. A lot of times, like Copilot will suggest a really long block of code and it'll look really good. I'm like, oh yeah, tab. And then it won't run. And then you'll find somewhere in the middle of that, it did something wrong. And now instead of writing my own code, I'm debugging code, which is also an important skill. But you can't just take what it gives you at face value. And that's, true for other applications of LLMs as well. And then another thing, like one of the reasons you see me roll my eyes is having been around, and frankly, my career has benefited from different hype cycles around machine learning and AI. And the way we just kind of run to new shiny things as a society and don't think about the implications has always concerned me a little bit. And I am very passionate about building all sorts of things, whether I'm working with wood or electronics or I'm 3D printing or welding, whatever it is, that I don't just build software. Yeah. I've always loved technology and making things. And that's my one of my creative outlets. Now I'm cynical about AI, but it will replace many human jobs.
Oh, here you go. You're gonna get the fan base riled up here in a little bit.
I'm not saying it's replacing us tomorrow, right? And I'm not saying there will never be a place for humanity, but I think if you look at least across the last let's say 2 centuries of human history, we have not managed creative destruction with much compassion. So, economic term, creative destruction, we invented this, we automated the factory. So now all the factory jobs are gone. All right. That's kind of, call it human progress. Now that we're AI automating writing and music and art like that doesn't seem as cool, but if we want to chalk it up to human progress and AI assistance, that's great. But it's definitely, while I'm happy to see it making people more efficient, it will eventually, that efficiency will lead to reduced headcount. I would just like to see us thinking about how we manage that as a society.
That's interesting, because we have had guests on the show who have said the opposite. So I think you're technically the first person to actually come on the show and share a sentiment like that. So, chat, feel free to ask questions of somebody who has had the counter sentiment to something that we've talked about on stream frequently. But back down to the tactical level, because you did mention using Copilot and other coding tools for the team and yourself, and you've encouraged to do so. And I've always been in support of you doing that in a responsible fashion so as not to embarrass your CISO, I'm sure. How do you feel that those tools help engineering efforts, and what are some good and better best practices if people want to employ those types of tools?
Yeah, that's a good one. Of course, you and I have talked about this, but it's the way to think about them is an accelerant for engineers, and they're definitely a great productivity tool. Like I said, don't take what Copilot suggests just wholesale. You still have to think for yourself, review it. Now, it can suggest code that solves your problem. Maybe once in a while it comes up with a solution that I look at and I go, oh, actually, that's better than what I was about to do. It might be more performant. It might be more secure because it's learning from a very large data set, like incomprehensibly large to a human brain. And so that's good. I think it's important for us to remember that we don't treat it any differently than a human. There's still a human who's accepting whatever Copilot puts out. It's not like it's just writing code that never gets reviewed. All of our code still has, somebody writes something, a peer reviews it, and then it's got to go through all the pipeline checks, all the security scans, all the unit tests, all the integration tests, all that stuff. So it's not like we have plenty of compensating controls if Copilot decides to do something dumb. So long as you're thinking about it as an accelerant, we're definitely not yet at a point where it's writing software instead of hiring people.
But I think I think what you just mentioned there at the end, I think I sat in a room full of my peers, my CISO peers, a few weeks ago, and this topic came up as well. And I think that was a shared sentiment. It was like, hey, listen, like there's nothing wrong with using these tools to help because you still have the same processes in place, like peer review, like code scanning, like unit testing and things like that have to be done before the code goes into production. So I think that there's still just a little bit of FUD, I think, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that exists out there in terms of like, oh my God, you're asking Copilot to write code for you. You're going to end up with, a poisoned prompt, and you're going to end up with a backdoor. But I mean, I think if you've got failed processes, you run just as much of a risk of having that as you do with Copilot.
Yeah, I mean, it's no worse than, we had a contractor doing work for us, and they got all, maybe they were pissed off or wanted to build on a backdoor or anything, right? Like we still at Query, we have plenty of controls that's going to catch that. Yeah. Same thing with Copilot, right? Yeah. It's no worse than a bad human actor.
No worse than a bad human actor. All right, we're going to hit a couple of questions here really quick because we did see one come in. I'm going to hit Dan's over in LinkedIn first. Good afternoon. Where should I go to get access to the Slack channel? I think you had mentioned a way to get access to the Slack channel for OCSF.
Yeah. If you go to github.com/OCSF to pull up the organizations page.
If I can get one of the moderators to do this and to drop this into chat as Jeremy's talking about it.
Yeah, there is a section there, Slack workspace, and it basically just send an email to info@ocsf.io. And there, it's so long as you appear to be an actual human being involved in some aspect of security, you're going to be approved. There's not there are no background checks or anything to get into the Slack instance.
So don't use your Chat GPT persona to try to get access to the Slack channel. Yeah. Fraser wants to know, for someone who wants to get familiar with OCSF, where would you recommend to go learn about it besides just the GitHub project?
That is a good question, and I think that's an area where we need to get better. So there are some links off of the GitHub project. That's kind of like the top level of all things OCSF right now. There is a website that should be out soon. I would say the next thing would be schema.ocsf.io. You can go to that website for all the OCSF documentation. There are a couple of links from really both of those. There's a white paper Paul Agabian from Splunk, one of the kind of godfathers of OCSF, wrote to Understanding OCSF. There's an FAQ document. There's a GitHub repository. Those things help. There isn't yet like an OCSF for Dummies or a good OCSF reference. I mean, maybe
As you
that's
guys
what
are
I'll do
listening to
next.
this sounds like
Yeah.
content. If some of y'all are looking to get the leading edge, this looks like content right here.
Yeah. Maybe I should see if O'Reilly will back me in writing a book on it or something. So yeah, it is. I do think that's an area where we could do better, and I say that as somebody who gets a ton of questions from people all over looking to get started. Like I don't.
What about projects? If you had to think about, like, if somebody wanted to dive into OCSF and be able to, I mean, obviously the code's on GitHub, but what would you envision like a lab or a project would look like for somebody who wanted to kind of like see OCSF in action? I mean, I know that one was really off the wall. Let's see if you got an answer.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a great suggestion. I would say, like, see if you can get started with Security Lake, or even just like dive into the documentation as at least an example of something that's OCSF all the way through, that uses the schema pretty broadly, and has some documentation, has some, you can fire it up, probably in the free tier, certainly not spend much money. That would be one way to get started. And depending on what you're comfortable with, you could, if you read Python, there's some tooling on the GitHub that you could read through to better understand it. Or if you read Elixir, you can read through some of the OCSF server code. Those aren't like the most user-friendly ways to get started. So
you mentioned a couple of things. If people wanted to do more, where are some things that the OCSF community needs help with, where people in the community who may be listening to this, who kind of like you were sitting on the outside and consumers of OCSF looking to get involved? What areas do you think that people, like, where does OCSF need help with right now as a community?
I think it's what we just talked about. It's really, there are a lot of smart people working on OCSF, and the people who are engaged in it a lot already know it. So making it more accessible to people who don't know it yet. Like I've seen, it's when it started, there's a lot of like engineer types, security engineer, distinguished engineer, whatever. And now we have more and more security analysts and operators getting involved, and they don't want to have to think about fixed or variable length encoding or any of that like data engineering stuff. They just want to know, like, okay, like somebody trying to, how do I figure out what it would like? How do I model somebody trying to log in, or a malicious process or something? And I feel like we're still, it's trying to find your way through those for that audience. It's kind of like jumping into a cold pool.
So what you're saying is you're ripe for input from practitioners and people who've got their hands on the keyboard as much as you are from the data nerds and the distinguished engineers and a lot of the really smart folks that you've got going on.
Yeah. I would love to see like people who are a little less technical, who are, who are working through learning it, keep good notes, and think of it like, what are the mental models that help you and from that persona better understand the schema and the framework, so that I think that's what we need the most right now. Adding to it, getting more vendor participation, more mapping examples, and like we've added a lot of those recently, but more of that certainly helps. And that's another thing you can look at if you're looking to get started. Go through, there's a repository of mapping examples, and that can help. But yeah.
Cybertooth comes through and says, if AWS is supporting OCSF, what is required of individual contributors? The lines are blurred between open source and vendor supported, in his opinion.
AWS is supporting OCSF. I guess which individual contributors are like at AWS, or
I think back to your SOC analyst one, right? So you've got AWS, which is kind of this big organization, and whenever somebody hears that AWS is supporting OCSF, there's this feeling of like, well, AWS is so big, and also it's a vendor. what value could I actually really bring as an individual contributor to it? And so I think, speak more to kind of like what that value as an individual contributor when you're working with billion-dollar organizations like Splunk and AWS, like don't they have this multitude of smart people that are already making something like OCSF better?
Yeah, AWS definitely does, and they were involved in the community. I don't know like what they require of people, people working on OCSF at AWS, but they're building a lot of tools because they committed to it for security. Like, they're building tooling around it, and that just helps the community. And then as far as like AWS is supporting it in that they're involved in the community. They were a founding member. Security Lake is like it's OCSF native. But I definitely don't feel like they're steering it or really that any one company is trying to influence it in a way that's only good for them. This is really an open community. It started with SIM-like data, but it's expanded to other types of security relevant data.
Good. I think that's what's important to hear out of a project like this, right? Is that there is no one company agenda that's driving it, right?
Yeah.
So, Doc G Money says, where do you see it in 5 years' time? Where do you see OCSF in 5 years' time?
I expect we're going to see much broader participation. I think there will be a couple more big names in security that are, if not fully OCSF under the hood, that talk OCSF fluently. I know of a couple of big names that are working on pretty broad OCSF-based APIs. So we'll see a lot more benefits to interoperability. One of the interesting things, there was a market researcher analyst did a study recently and found that some CISOs are starting to require support for OCSF from their vendors. It's not a big number, but I was surprised to see it non-zero. It was 10% or it's in the OCSF Slack. So, like a very large percentage are familiar with it and kind of following along and curious about it. And so I think that will grow. I think it will be, for vendors, it will become an important thing to close deals. And at that point, we'll really see it get traction.
I know how that cycle works.
Yes, absolutely. So if you have any influence over buying decisions, feel free to work that in there. Yeah. I think we'll see it much. I think the schema itself will grow. I think by 5 years out, we'll probably see an OCSF 2.0 that's a little more refined in some ways. I think we'll see much better guides to OCSF, better understanding it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Before I let you go, I understand. Now, keep me honest on this. I understand that you guys have wrote a song for OCSF. Is that what I heard?
Well, I wrote a song, and I wrote one about AI too, actually.
You didn't tell me that either.
I didn't warn you.
You did not.
When we did our company annual kickoff earlier this year for Query, the whole time I was traveling in, it was an early flight through the airport, on the plane, all that. I was just thinking about this. I had to talk about our data model and give an update on OCSF stuff. And instead of thinking through what I should talk about, I found myself coming up with song lyrics, and this has become... I used to do a lot of public speaking, and then COVID hit and that just stopped, and I'm kind of okay with that. But in the few times I've had to get in front of an audience since, I go to think about, all right, what are my talking points going to be? And instead of lyrics kind of come into my head. So,
Chad is obviously demanding to hear it. So if you have your handy dandy guitar close by, would you mind sharing your OCSF shanty with us?
It's not a shanty.
His guitar is never that far away from him, as you can tell.
No, it's not. Let me see. I'm not. Sorry, I don't usually do this. One sec.
This is one of the best comments that I think I've ever seen come across the reason number 13 why I listen to you guys. Because we do random musicals on cyber insecurity.
Really, I'm just trying to intimidate future guests. You know, this is you give me like 2 days notice.
You're definitely setting a bar for future guests that now they're gonna have to come ready with a guitar to sing. All right, are we ready? On you, Jeremy.
That's not coming through yet.
Yeah, no, you're
on
good.
Me?
Yeah. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to remind the people in the chat that they kind of asked for this. So. An old programmer had to think one dark and windy day. Upon his chair he rested as he sought a better way. When an open schema for cybersecurity he saw, broader than the western sky and deep as Satan's maw. Its GitHub was on fire and its Slack was looking real. It was all defined in JSON automation he could feel. This can model all my data with exuberancy pride, regardless of the data source. With one search, all I can find. Yippee-hi-ho, yippee-hi-hey. Open security schema. But wait, there's more.
Oh no, there's more. Let's go. Let's get the hands together, Chad. Let's go.
His shirt was soaked with sweat. He's been struggling with schemas and he hadn't solved it yet. He'd thought to toil forever, bespoke formats till he'd die, till he'd seen this open schema. He raised his spirits high. As the pull request scrolled past him, he saw one tag his name. If you want to save your soul from hell and model in the strange, then coder, change your ways today and use this new schema. Be locked into your vendors, wanting a data enema. Yippee-hi-ho, yippee-hi-hey. Open security schema. Open security schema. Open security schema. Just fade out.
Love it. There you go. First ever tune on stream. Look at that. Chat loves it. Chat loves it. My DMs are blowing up. People are, look at that. Look at that. You made Query more popular for the music than you did. But, hey, Matt, we got to change the strategy. We're getting into the music industry. Jeremy, thank you so much. On behalf of my community, on behalf of my chat, on behalf of everybody else who's listening, thank you so very much for joining me today. I really appreciate having you here. Any closing remarks or anything you'd like to say to everybody?
This has been a ton of fun. Thank you, Neal. You're a great coworker. You're a good host. I'm happy to have been here. Find me on LinkedIn if you've got questions about OCSF or other parody songs I've written. And feel free to reach out.
We did just get raided by Papa Nut. I appreciate the raid of folks. Unfortunately, you were at the end of the chat, or at the end of the stream. I appreciate all the raiders coming in. Catch the VOD. We just talked about it. Open cybersecurity schema framework with my good host, my good co-host, my good friend Jeremy Fisher here. Jeremy, we're gonna say goodbye to the community. We got some work to do. We got to get back to it anyway. Community, no stream tomorrow. I'm going to put you back on the green room, Jeremy. I'm talking to my chat.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
There'll be no stream tomorrow for Tea with a Hacker. I've got treatment tomorrow, so unfortunately no AMA tomorrow, but we will be back next week during our normally regularly scheduled broadcast, and then in 2 weeks from today, we'll be back right here for the Security Data Operations stream. In the meantime, stay awesome. I appreciate you as always, and we'll see you next time.